Hello and welcome to CAS Talks. Liberty, one of the UK's largest real estate investment trusts, are planning a demerger. I spoke to Professor Simon Stevenson, an expert in this area, to find out what that means and what it is exactly that real estate investment trusts do.
Real estate investment trusts are basically like sort of a normal property company, except they have certain distinct characteristics. In particular, they have tax exemption. So as long as they sort of fulfill the legal requirements that 75% of their assets are in property-related activities, they can sort of have tax exemption with respect to their dividend payments.
So Liberty are one of the UK's largest real estate investment trusts. Why are their plans to demerge such a big deal?
There's been this ongoing debate about sort of should REITs be focused in terms of the specific property type and sector they invest in, or should they be diversified? And Liberty is sort of the first major REIT in the UK to follow the more US style of being very focused. So what they're proposing is that they divide themselves up into two companies, one of which will be sort of shopping centre investments throughout the UK. And that London portfolio is going to be sort of hived off into this second sort of company, which is going to be called Capital and Counties.
So where do you sit in the idea of focusing their operations? Is this a good route to go down?
There's a huge amount of pros and cons and sort of arguments one way and the other on the whole issue of should REITs be focused or not. To some degree, I mean, the biggest argument against REITs being focused is that you're basically saying to a company whose business is to run a portfolio of investment assets to ignore what we all teach our students week 2, that you should diversify a portfolio. On the other hand, there's a lot of arguments in favour of focus. The issue that sort of the Liberty sort of proposed demerger sort of brought up is some of those arguments, okay, very fair arguments, some of them might not be as justified as people perhaps make out.
So what started this trend towards focusing of operations in the United States?
There are 3 major arguments in favour of focus. One is that if a firm is diversified across different property sectors, so a bit of office, bit of retail, bit of industrial, they might get diversification benefits. They might get enhanced returns because of those benefits. At the same time, it's going to cost them a lot more. They're going to have to monitor more markets, do more analysis. And there's a lot of work in the US that has found that actually, yes, diversified REITs can get benefits by diversifying. But in most cases, those gains are offset by higher expenses. The other sort of big argument sort of in favour of focus, that is a very fair argument, is that by being diversified, it makes it harder for analysts and investors to actually examine the value of the company. There's sort of less transparency there, and that effectively they sort of discount the share price to take that into account. So they're the 2 big arguments, that really do sort of stand up in terms of the US evidence. The final argument, though, is the one which is a bit more sort of questionable.
Simon, what would you say is the main motivation behind this move to focus operations?
The final sort of issue in relation to focus in the US is that effectively you are taking away the investment decision from investors. So investors would ideally prefer that firms be very focused, that they make the investment and diversification decision themselves. And a lot of the news reports relating to the Liberty demerger have sort of cited this as a reason. The problem is that there's sort of increasing evidence, in the US but also in the UK, that actually the markets don't really differentiate between firms. The vast majority of REITs' share price movement is driven at a sector level. So you actually don't have office REITs behaving that much differently from retail REITs. Sort of that.
Do you see a lot of other real estate investment trusts in the UK following this route of focusing their operations?
I think it is sort of re-raising the sort of question about sort of focus. Land Securities, what the largest UK REIT, sort of looked at this issue a couple of years ago. So I think there is sort of a possibility for more REITs to go down this sort of demerger sort of alternative. I think there are specific cases that do make sense in the Liberty case. What is very interesting in this demerger is that the capital and counties section, the London portfolio, will not retain its REIT status. It's actually giving up its tax benefits and reverting to a normal property company structure. And that is because that sort of segment of the company does a huge amount of development work, and REITs aren't that suitable for development-focused firms. And I think sort of Liberty have acknowledged that, and I think that is also an interesting point of actually it's the first firm that's explicitly basically said a REIT structure is not necessarily the best structure for a property investment company.